Hello, public opinion aficionados, and welcome to Rasmussen Reports. And today's video is going to be a little bit different than normal. Normally, we have some fresh polling numbers back. They're relevant to the news, and we talk about them, and then we go on to the next thing. But it's not very often where I get to sit back and put my thoughts together and really flesh out where I think we are as Americans. And where I think we are is somewhere very, very existential. And I think we can all feel it, but it's really hard to put our finger on exactly what it is. Is it a battle between Republicans and Democrats? That doesn't quite feel right. Between the right and the left, conservative and liberal, what even does conservative mean? But I think the polling does tell us a lot about where we really are and the problems we have. And I think that I have some opinions and conclusions about how we should address them. So I sat down and put a speech together and gave it Saturday at Brannon House's Worldview Weekend. So I thought, well, you guys should know what's going on too. It raises a lot of troubling concerns. And before you call me a black pillar, listen, I give good news when there's good news, and I give bad news when there's bad news. But people weren't calling Paul Revere a black pillar. And this is flashing red sirens. There are major problems that everybody is sleeping on. And so we're going to go deep. We're going to look at exactly how screwed America is right now. So I'm not going to go through all the intros. You know who I am. I'm Mark Mitchell, head pollster of Rasmussen Reports, an independent pollster. And if you're seeing me for the very first time, what independent pollster means is that neither party pays me to try to help them win. And ever since Trump got elected, we've seen really some extraordinary stuff. Every day we poll not only on presidential job approval, but also on whether people believe that the country is headed in the right direction or has it gotten off on the wrong track. And as of this week, we have been setting a massive record, 35 consecutive weeks with 40% or above right direction results. That is unprecedented. The highest number we had ever seen before was 7 consecutive weeks back during Trump 1.0. And this is incredible. I mean, it was 30% roughly on average for most of Joe Biden's term. And for the very first time this term, right direction hit 50%, which means for the very first time in all of Rasmussen Reports polling, a majority of Americans thought the country was headed in the right direction. And there's nothing like it. I don't know how to parse it other than I feel like many Americans thought that America was being healed, like a major weight was lifted, just palpable relief. But, there's bad news. That existential battle and what it is. Now, for the audience who might not have been familiar with us, I talked a little bit about our record. And yeah, people slander us as a right-wing pollster. Well, I have some right-wing views, but I hate the Republican Party just as much as I hate Democrats. And our track record over and over shows that we're among the most accurate, even by people like 538, who ranked us number 5 in the 2020 cycle. And this time, all the ranking people are basically out of business. And we were there over and over again predicting a Trump +2 national popular vote win, and we got 6 out of the 7 battlegrounds correct. The 7th one was a toss-up, and our average polling error among all of our state polling was almost 1 point to Kamala Harris supporting. So how's that for a right-wing pollster? But anyways, talking about polling, though, it used to be used for the prediction of election outcomes and understanding sentiment of America, but now it's become one of the biggest tools for narrative gatekeeping. It's an absolute corrupt industry. And there's still a smattering of some decent independent pollsters, but major academic and media names in the era of Trump just keep missing over and over again to the left. And that's not natural. Like if you miss to the left once, you correct it and you shouldn't miss again. So, after about the third time, it becomes very clear that these people are just shilling for the establishment. And, people like us who are independent are dangerous. That's why the information I'm giving you is so important. And let me just take a moment to say, again, neither party pays for this because there are some uncomfortable truths in here for the Republican Party. We aren't funded by USAID or NGOs, so please hit the like button, subscribe to our channel. Really would appreciate it. But we got attacked with disingenuous slander, fake fact checkers from the Washington Post and Newsweek, swatted 3 times already, hacked a couple of times, and put on the CIA's list of top misinformation spreaders on Twitter. The GEC, they tried to shut us down. They've even had clients pull. It's really incredible. But we've persisted because we aim to actually represent the voter, because you, dear voter, do not have a lobbyist on K Street. Everybody else with more than $1 billion does, but not you. So, this is an example of the kind of polling that a traditional mainstream media pollster would do. They would look at the election, the head to head matchup, and say, oh, Trump is leading Kamala Harris by 2 points. Well, actually, ABC Washington Post would have Kamala Harris up by 6, but you all know what I mean. And then maybe they'd want to get a little bit deeper. They'd want to know, well, what's this election going to be about? And so they'll ask, what's the most important issue? And people would say, oh, well, the number one issue is rising prices. The number two issue is illegal immigration. And they might even deign to ask the question, well, who's leading on the issue of immigration? And people would say Trump. And even though Trump was leading on the issue of illegal immigration, that doesn't necessarily mean he's going to win the election, because maybe people care more about abortion. Maybe they don't think that he's the right president for rising prices. And you'd probably get a pretty bland result from most of the mainstream media pollsters on a question like this. Something that's like, Trump leads by +5 or +6. But, then we'd ask all these other questions. And these are the things that the establishment doesn't want asked, even about pretty straightforward topics like illegal immigration. Things like, by a 4-to-1 margin, voters think the government is doing too little to stop illegal immigration. That's pretty uncomfortable. They blame the government. Only 25% of voters want a level of legal immigration higher than the current level. Americans don't care about your poor and huddled masses anymore. They just don't. Deporting all illegal aliens wins 54-39. We've actually had numbers even higher than that. 64% called the border situation an invasion. Only 22% use this disingenuous newspeak term, undocumented immigrant. And everywhere on the mainstream media, they always use that term. No, over 60% of Americans use a term with the word illegal in it. And obviously, we all know that the establishment is trying to humanize these people, because that's what the big business folks want. Even the Republican big business folks, because the second the government can got kicked with the CR back in March, they immediately went behind closed doors, and the Republicans started lobbying for a amnesty bill. So tone deaf. 72%, this one's pretty relevant to the government shutdown that we are in today. 72% say it's important to prevent illegals from getting benefits like Medicaid. And now all of a sudden you can see that we're in a situation where the mainstream media, it's almost like the curtain has been pulled back on the great and powerful Wizard of Oz. Americans do not want illegal immigrants to get free taxpayer-funded health care. And it would appear that that's at least one of the reasons that the Democrats have shut down the government. And so why are they doing it? Why are they shutting down the government for something that Americans don't want? It makes absolutely no sense. But let's talk about battles. Is it a political battle, a battle between Republicans and Democrats? And if so, what is the state of that battle? Well, there obviously is a battle between Republicans and Democrats. And the state of the battle is that in 2024, Trump had a narrow win. People call it a mandate, and I call it a mandate because his agenda items were overwhelmingly popular. But, he picked up a small majority in Congress, a small majority in the Senate. He runs the whole government, but it was a narrow win. It's basically roughly tied now in the registration picture. And right now, the Democrats have a slight lead on the generic ballot. Not sure what that means for the fall of November 2026. But both parties have absolutely horrifying approval ratings. It's not just the Democrats. Everybody talks about that 19% fake Quinnipiac Democrat Party favorability number. But no, it's not that low. And Republicans and Democrats actually aren't that different. And in some ways, the Democrat Party still has an advantage on questions like which party cares more about people like you. The RNC, the NRCC, the NRSC, the Republican Governors Association, and the National Republican Party, the Republican infrastructure, so to speak, are at best MAGA tolerant. But I'm still hearing stories from across the nation of America First candidates being shut out ubiquitously, about people not wanting these folks to win, about squishy moderates running, and mostly these people just want to maintain power. They don't care about ideology. The Senate and House leadership for Republicans and Democrats basically mostly serves other masters. Democrats have been radicalized to a place where they can't even compromise at all. That's why the government shut down. There is no more compromise. Literally, if they don't resist with every fiber of their being, anything the Republicans want to do, their core left base will protest them, call for their resignation, trash them all over Reddit. And yet, despite the fact that the Democrat Party stands for nothing that voters want, they still can win on their turnout machine, on fraud, of course, and on all of this money that just miraculously seems to keep coming from nowhere. And of course, the Mets versus Yankees effect. There's just some people that support the Democrats that are unwilling or unable to break the cloud of cognitive dissonance that keeps them loyal to their brand. So it is kind of an unstable stalemate. And the outlook, I would say, in the short term, it favors Democrats for 2026. It's a question about how much, and a lot could happen. Obviously, a lot of caveats about the things that Trump could unveil between now and next fall. In the medium term, I think it favors Republicans because the Democrats' sins will catch up to them. Maybe the 2020 census will be corrected. Maybe we'll see some election integrity reform. The 2030 census is going to be good for the Republicans. But in the long term, again, it actually favors the Democrats. And we're going to get to that. Now, maybe it isn't a battle between Republicans and Democrats. Maybe it's an ideological battle. Conservative versus liberal. People use those words a lot. I don't know if people really still understand what they mean. On a daily basis, I struggle to define the word conservative as well, even though people have labeled me as one. I don't know. What have conservatives conserved? I think that's a valid question. But we can look to the polling and see, well, in the upper left, the ideological makeup of independents hasn't really changed that much, although independents are growing as a share of the electorate. And then below them, you can see the makeup of Republicans. And over time, there's actually been a slight uptick of people who identify themselves as conservative. Conservative or very conservative now makes up the majority of the Republican Party. And I guess that's a positive trend. But, with this world of peak political polarization, look at the Democrat numbers. And now you can see a problem, a trend of the Democrats increasingly identifying as liberal or very liberal. This is not the 1990s Democrat Party that elected and appreciated a centrist Bill Clinton. They are now very liberal. And we feel this just anecdotally, talking to some of these people that maybe 10, 20 years ago, they wouldn't have supported things like transgender surgery for minors. Maybe they wouldn't have supported things like reparations for slavery. But this is the Overton window moving left, and it rarely, if ever, moves to the right. The only person that I think is moving the Overton window to the right now is Donald Trump. The Overton window has moved left on almost everything. It might feel to you like people are moving to the right on LGBT. And no, it's just the majority of people that oppose LGBT are getting more vocal. Actually, the country is becoming increasingly more supportive of them. In fact, the country was split just recently on whether transgender people should be in the military. And I don't know why. Maybe people just assume, well, if they want to get shot, that's their prerogative. But the fact is, the window moves left, and there is no structural, organized way that I'm aware of that's being used to move the window right. And just an example of why the Overton window moves only to the left. Well, the left says they'll pick something super ridiculous. How about reparations? Yep, white people should pay black people in America for the sins of people who might not have even been their ancestors, to people who might not even have been descendants of slaves, just for the fact that slavery happened over 100 years ago. And the opposite view to reparations is people like talking heads on Fox News saying, no, reparations are bad. We shouldn't pay reparations. Well, that is not the equal and opposite position. The equal and opposite position might be something different. Like, well, white America already paid reparations with hundreds and thousands of Union dead troops. Or it might be, well, no, black people should pay reparations for the harm that they've caused to white people through their proportionally higher violent crime statistics. Now, I'm not debating the merit of any of those. I'm just saying that those are not systematically pushed back on in any way. And there it is. Now, what I hear a lot is people saying, well, luckily, Generation Z, the Zoomers, will save us. And here's our chart of 18 to 39-year-old voters. Unfortunately, I don't have one for 18 to 29-year-old, but the trend is similar. It's the last 10 years of presidential polling, Trump versus Hillary Clinton, Trump versus Joe Biden, and then Trump versus a smattering of Democrat candidates. And what you can see in our polls is that overwhelmingly, 18 to 39-year-old voters said that they were going to vote for Hillary Clinton and not Donald Trump. And you can see at the end, I think that's the effect of the Access Hollywood tape. The numbers really blew out. Hillary Clinton won with these people by over 20 points. Then in the next cycle in 2020, Biden didn't really gain on Hillary Clinton's support, but Trump certainly did. And I think a lot of this is people abandoning third parties or becoming more politicized. And so a lot less of them say not sure. And Trump almost pulled it out. And we can debate why this was. I think a lot of it was probably people not liking the Democrat response to COVID in blue areas. And then this cycle, look, it was neck and neck. In fact, Joe Biden was going to lose to Donald Trump among 18 to 39-year-olds. And there you have it at the end, Kamala Harris pulling an upset and coming from behind to eke out Donald Trump in this age bracket. And I think a lot of that was probably her TikTok and Instagram and Brat Summer and all of the actors and actresses, all of that money that she paid. And so money does matter. And actually, some of these things still work on people. Maybe you can call this the Taylor Swift effect. But still, the trend here is that Donald Trump this time around pulled out more 18 to 39-year-old support, certainly than anybody expected, and more than he ever had before. Now, you've maybe also heard a lot of things, maybe headlines, about how Turning Point USA is reaching people like this on campuses more and more, and that's probably true. But you have to understand, we're talking about the majority. And just because Turning Point exists and is addressing these people doesn't mean it's addressing the majority of them. You might have heard that they're going to church in record numbers, that they're having like less casual sex. Maybe they don't drink as much. And yeah, those are all positive trends for sure. But the truth is, no, these people are deeply and fundamentally damaged. They're probably essentially lost as a generation, a deeply messed up cohort of individuals, the 18 to 29-year-olds. First off, they have massive levels of mental issues. 35% of 18 to 39-year-olds say that they've been diagnosed with a mental condition. 28% of them are on medication for a mental condition. The relationship situation is really damaged. We all heard stories about how bad the dating scene has been messed up by online apps and porn and OnlyFans and stuff. The 47% of 18 to 29-year-olds say they're single, and only 35% of them are looking to get married. 37% aren't even trying. That's like 17% of the entire age bracket that's completely checked out, like not procreating. There's a 17% 18 to 29-year-old unemployment level. That's awfully horrifying. We're probably one hard landing away from 25%, which is when we get violent uprisings. 62% of them say the economy is not fair to young people, and many of them aren't even confident that they're ever going to be able to afford a house. In fact, only 52% of Gen Z says it's possible for whoever who wants to work to find work. This is not inspiring stuff. In fact, less than 40% of them said today's children will be better off than their parents. So overwhelmingly, there's hopelessness, despair, apathy in this age cohort. Not good. Not good for America, but it gets even worse. Now, this is from a poll we did with our friend Justin Haskins at the Heartland Institute, who is a friend of Glenn Beck. They often cover our polling together. And what I understand is that this poll is blowing things up behind the scenes, a gut punch to the conservative movement because, well, let me just read some of this. A shocking number of young Trump voters support socialist policies, a Democrat socialist president in 2028, and even UN supervision of America, according to a new poll from Rasmussen Reports and Justin Haskins. The stuff in here is incredible. 76% of young voters agree that major industries like healthcare, energy, and big tech should be nationalized to give more control and equity to the people, including a strong majority of young Republicans, over 70%. 53% would like to see a Democratic socialist candidate win the 2028 presidential election, including a huge amount, 35% of those who said they voted for Trump in 2024. 55% said they would support a law that would confiscate Americans' excess wealth, including things like second homes, luxury cars, private boats, in order to help young people buy a home for the first time. Absolutely horrible stuff. There was even Trump voters, only 33% of them said no when offered a list of options of what to set an income cap at. So even Trump voters in the 18 to 39-year-old bracket want incomes capped. That's pretty socialistic. And so the trend, in my opinion, isn't that these people who voted for Trump are more conservative or more capitalistic or any of that. They basically want the system burned down because we aren't offering a better situation for them or speaking their language. This must change. Well, maybe they should speak our language. Maybe they should just buck up and become capitalists. Good luck with that. It's not going to win these people over. They're just going to play video games. If these problems aren't fixed, the society that these people here build is going to be completely unrecognizable. It is not going to be what you grew up with. It absolutely isn't. I mean, these people don't even believe in capitalism. Positive support for capitalism in Gallup numbers, they track this every year, is down to 54%, the lowest it's ever been, and it's driven by these people. They don't even know what capitalism is, and obviously the school system isn't teaching them correctly. But can you blame that on them? I don't think you can. But it gets even worse. It's not just the fact that they have problems. They have mental conditions. Their dating scene's messed up. They're not capitalistic. They want drastic solutions to the problems that have been dumped in their lap. Well, one of the problems is that they don't even want the same things on a gender basis. Look at these numbers out of NBC News. On the left side, you have how people define success, a definition of success among Gen Z men who say they voted for Trump. And that is most Gen Z men. Most Gen Z men did vote for Trump. So most of these men, these young men, say that definition of success for them is having children, 34%, financial independence, 33%, fulfilling job or career, 30%. You would expect a young man to have these ambitions, but being married is up there at 29%. So 34% having children, 29% being married. But then look at the other side, women who voted for Kamala Harris. And that's most women. Most women under 30 did vote for Kamala Harris. And overwhelmingly, what they want is a fulfilling job or career. They want to be seen. They want to make a splash. They want people to look up to them as a strong, stunning, and brave career woman. And okay, I applaud that. My wife has a great career in education. She also raised 4 children and took a break in order to do it. But this is really strong. This is what they want. They want to have money to do things, 46%, having emotional stability, 39%. Using talents and resources to help others, 37%, financial independence, 32%. Okay, some of these are noble and good. Some of these are a little self-centered. Some of these might be a siren song of things that are being presented to them as what they should want by the feministic college system and the way they've been brought up and the way that media and entertainment present women. Okay, fine, maybe, but look at the bottom. What do these women absolutely not want? They don't want to get married and they don't want to have children. They don't think that those are definitions of success. And I've heard people on Twitter tell me, well, that's just the patriarchy. And why should these people be domestic slaves? It's like, okay, if that's your opinion, it's a messed up society. And in many of these people's cases, they will get married. They will have children, but it will be deferred into their late 30s. They're just deferring this stuff. And, their selections aren't going to be as good. They're not going to have as many children. And in any case, when young men and young women are so far apart, this is a very, very, very important sign that our society is deeply and fundamentally jacked up. And we can all conjecture about the reasons: postmodernism, Marxism, the influence of people in media. It's everywhere. But this is the damage. And it gets even worse. Economically, it's almost hopeless for Americans. A lot of people don't track this because why would the establishment track wealth inequality? But there are problems. Massive, massive problems with wealth inequality. People track the Gini coefficient. I don't know if that's the right one. This is my own metric here that I believe shows very, very, very clearly that there has been a systematic murder of the American dream. You can almost pinpoint it exactly on the chart. What this chart tracks is per capita government debt. That means divide up all the government debt by the number of Americans. You can cut it different ways. You'll probably have the same trend, if you did it by taxpayer or whatever. So this is your personal debt burden divided by the median real income. What is the income of the exact middle human in America? And you can look at the debt and say, wow, it's spiraling out of control. Well, it would be fine if incomes were rising to meet it, but that is not the case. And so you can see that this ratio has just absolutely, absolutely exploded. It was hovering at about 0.5, and that's pretty good. That's pretty good. That means that the average American's median real income was more than twice as big as their per capita total public debt share. But now the ratio is up to 2.5, which means that this number has gotten 5 times worse for the middle American than it was just a little bit over 20 years ago. And why did this happen? When did this happen? It wasn't all spending. It was socialization of losses after the great financial crisis. It was bipartisan rescue acts, crisis legislation. It was COVID and the American Recovery Act. And also, it was global homo offshoring of literally everything under the sun. Foreign engineers taking Americans' high paying white collar jobs. Americans' wages have absolutely stagnated. The corporate welfare queens have collaborated with the government to eke out every last cent of earnings per share, and they've literally pushed the taxpayer donkey too far. I even saw statistics that the lower 50% of Americans pay like 1% of the taxes. It's absolutely incredible. And so, in my opinion, this is a pretty good chart for the Republican Party to look at. This is the chart that needs to be focused on, that needs to be corrected. That line needs to come down, and it's not all going to, you're not going to pay this debt off. So it has to come down other ways. How do you do that? Well, it's challenging, and maybe things like Trump's H-1B program, maybe things like taxing remittances, maybe things like mass deportations will help get us there. But will it be enough? Because if this isn't fixed, it's going to be fixed by the left, and you're not going to like their solution. It's going to be kind of different. Now, we've seen a lot of people cover these problems, but what I'm trying to paint a picture for you is how hopeless it is, and that it is affecting the polling. It is affecting the way these people think, and you're not going to turn them Republican. These people are not going to vote for a Romney type. They don't believe those solutions will work. And so they don't feel like they have a future, and they're looking for things to fill the hole. So what fills that hole? Well, it could be religion. It could be. Is there a religious battle in America? A battle between Christianity and heathens, atheists? A battle between Christianity and the LGBTQ movement? I don't know. Maybe there's a lack of a battle, but just humor me for this one example. Let's just say that you were born into a Catholic family. You know, there's a crucifix with Christ on it hanging on your family wall. There's maybe some rosary beads. I don't know. A picture of Mary. I'm not Catholic, but your parents are Catholic. And so some of your family friends are probably Catholic as well. You go to services, you go to CCD or whatever they call it. You have friends in church. You go to their youth programs. There's a lot of cultural pressures that you as a child are subjected to that are just nudging you into the direction of Catholicism. A lot of on-ramps, a lot of things that will make you predisposed to become a Catholic. Think of all the societal forces at work. Well, it turns out that 15 to 20% of Gen Z identifies as Catholic, but this is wild. It turns out that 23% of Gen Z identifies as LGBTQ. This is out of the New York Times, but a lot of organizations have been tracking this. They find similar numbers, and it's absolutely mind-blowing. Almost a quarter of 18 to 29-year-olds are Gen Z. It's not exactly apples to apples, but it's the same people, largely. Almost a quarter of these people are part of the LGBTQ movement. We've all known that this issue is growing, but in my opinion, this has reached levels of existential threat because, and people will say, well, you know, a lot of them will just un-LGBTQ, they'll work it out. Well, when? In their 40s? Will these people go on to support our buckling system? Already we have a demographic wave. But people are just looking at the number of folks in the age cohort, not whether they're actually going to reproduce or not, whether they're going to create families that are economically stable enough to bear the costs of the aging boomers. What are these kids going to be like? Already, like over 30 of these people have mental health issues. Are their kids going to be less mentally competent or more mentally competent? I don't think more. Our social safety nets are already buckling, strained to breaking. And so this social contagion of LGBTQ is a massive problem. How does it happen? How did we get here? What are the forces? Well, I think that there's been a missing hole in Generation Z because prior generations have been decaying, certainly. But can it all be explained by parenting, public schools, entertainment, like all of the things that we know about? Now, we've polled on religion more than any other pollster, pretty much. And there is some cause for good news. In 2023, for instance, we asked, is Jesus Christ the Son of God who came to earth to save our sins? And 72% of America said yes, only 17% said no. I thought that was really stunning. They tell us over and over again that Christmas is a religious holiday and that it's one of our most important holidays. They tell us how often they attend church. And we've seen stunning results like this one from 2010. How important is your religious faith in your daily life? 57% said very important. Another 23% said somewhat. So that's 80% of America. And also take note of the 18 to 29-year-old column. 81% of those people said that their religion, said that their religious faith is an important part of their daily life. So pretty incredible. But the thing is, here's a similar question just from recently, from last week. Do you consider yourself a religious person? Interesting. Now, that's not the same question. We have a lot of these. They're not all apples to apples, but it is a very similar question. And just comparing it to 2010, it's not the same thing. Only 24% of America says they're a very religious person, 37% somewhat. So that's combined down to 61% from 80%. Only 24% say very religious. The number of people who said religion was an important part of their daily life was 57%, and now only 24% say they're very religious. But look at the 18 to 29-year-old column. Only 18% say very religious. Another 30% say somewhat. And so, again, I understand that people, I don't want to be called religious. That's creepy. People don't want me to act religious, but still my faith is important. Okay, sure. But this is not a good result. It's not a good result at all. And you can see the massive decline by age as people appear to be dechurching, abandoning the faith as they get younger. Now, America is still a religious country, and yet this trend continues. And it is troubling because what happens when we're completely godless? I don't know. But to understand this better, let's look at polling we did in October of 2024. This was a huge and important poll sponsored by the Institute for Faith and Culture. I'll try to link it in the YouTube video description. It's free. It's not behind a paywall. Well, why was it important? Well, there was a very troubling story at the time. I think it came out in August or September, and really everybody covered this. And the story was that there was an electoral crisis because 30 million evangelicals were going to sit out the election and not vote. That was done by George Barna, a big name in religious research. Charlie Kirk even covered it. People's hair was literally on fire. And we rushed into the field and found that absolutely no, that's not the case. It was fake news, and I don't know why his numbers showed something completely different from mine. And I would absolutely implore him to try to replicate my results. But only 8% of evangelicals in my poll said that they weren't going to vote, and they mostly had good reasons, like being convicts or not U.S. citizens. But let's take a look. This is a poll of self-identified U.S. Christians. And people will say, well, what's the difference between an evangelical and a Protestant? Well, I just asked them. And some people identified as evangelical and some people identified as Protestant. I'm sure you could come up with something more elegant, but this is a pretty straightforward way of making sure there's no overlap, okay? So let's not focus on that. Now, if you look at the first question, one of the things that you can see is that by age, there appears to be a complete abandonment of Protestant identification. Maybe that's some people not knowing what the word Protestant means, but it's also, as we know, a decay of the mainline denominations, kind of like cultural Christianity, where people just go to church like they do in The Simpsons. Well, that's going away. 59% of 65 and older say they're Protestant, only 26% of 18 to 29-year-olds. So more than half dead. So good job, Methodists. Good job, Presbyterians. If this trend continues, you're not going to exist. I guess people think that your religion doesn't really stand for much anymore, because I'm pretty sure most of the people that go to your traditional services do not identify as evangelical Christians, at least not the majority. And also look at people by age leaning into Catholicism. It's actually the younger people, 18 to 29s, who are more Catholic. Now, there are probably fewer 18 to 29-year-old Catholics than there are 40 to 49s, for instance. But by percentage, these people are more Catholic, 45% of people under 40. And so it would appear that they're leaning into traditional services. I'm sure there are some contemporary Catholic services. I don't know. But look, the trend is pretty stunning here. And maybe some of it has to do with the uptick in Hispanic Americans. I'm sure that's some of it. And obviously evangelicals going up a little bit as well with the 18 to 29s. But what I also thought was interesting is looking at how often you attend religious services. And the 18 to 29 say they attend religious services just as much as everybody else, pretty much. You know, the 65 and olders go one or more times a week. A lot of them. But, you know, if you cut it at a couple of times a month or more, they're just as rigorous attending church as the 65 and olders. And so if you can get them to church, they'll stay there. That's pretty interesting. They'll be just as upstanding members of the congregation as everybody else. And when did you begin practicing your religious beliefs? I also thought this was interesting, is that only 41% of 18 to 29-year-olds say that they have been attending church their entire life, raised Christian. 32% of them say that they only very recently or within the last few years became Christian. I think that that's pretty stunning. I would have expected a lot higher number of people who said that they have gone their entire life. So Christianity is reaching these people. Cultural Christianity is failing. Their parents maybe were neglectful here. And so again, I think it's probably not fair to blame them for being as godless as they are. We wrecked society and then handed them a bowl of crap and expected them to eat it. And they're not eating. But this is pretty stunning. Something's definitely going on. This first question here asks Christians, in terms of determining the future of Americans and our country, how important is the 2024 presidential election? And overwhelmingly, people said important. It's like, what is that? 92% overwhelmingly, 78% very important. Existential. Christians thought this election was existential. And Republicans and Democrats, by almost the exact same amount, said important. But then you have the second question, which is closer to your thinking, that Christians need to get involved politically or that Christians should stay out of politics. And Christians say get involved overwhelmingly, 55% to 31%. But look at the party numbers. Only 44% of Democrats think Christians should get involved politically, but 71% of Republicans do, and only 19% of Republicans want them to stay out. So I don't know. Do Democrats perceive Christianity more as an apolitical respite, a break from all the MSNBC watching? Or do Republicans consider Christianity as an underused vessel for societal change? I think it's probably fair to assume that. But here is where, in my opinion, it becomes very clear what's going on, like the wheels are falling off. U.S. Christians are only plus 2% pro-life. That's right. Only 45% of Christians in America say they're pro-life. 43% say pro-choice. Now, we've asked this a lot. I think the last time we asked it of all of America, pro-choice was like plus 16. You could say, well, Christianity is adding plus 18 points of pro-life support. And obviously, I don't really like litmus tests, but you know, we have to find proxies in this data. And I think that this is a pretty good proxy. Whether you're pro-life or pro-choice has a pretty strongly implied connotation that just maybe you support partial birth abortions, which many who are Christian would consider murder. But look at the party signal. Pretty stunning. 70% of Democrat Christians say they're pro-choice, but 23% of Republican Christians agree, and 64% of Republican Christians say they're pro-life. Only 1/4 of Democrat Christians are pro-life. So how does that happen? It would appear that a large portion of Democrat Christians have created a mental situation where it's okay to identify as Christian and go to church, but support abortion and the politicians who support abortion. But then when you layer in the candidates, it's even crazier. When thinking about the 2024 presidential election, which one more closely represents your opinions about abortion? And I don't like making this political, but I'm a political pollster and this is the data we have. And I think looking at the candidates, there's certain values that I think we can all agree that Kamala Harris has. There's certain values that Trump has. And you're ostensibly taught values in church. And so this is important information. And in the party signal, Christian Democrats overwhelmingly support Harris, and Christian Republicans overwhelmingly support Trump on the issue of abortion. And this isn't about voting, this is which candidate represents your opinions about abortion. I think we can all agree that for Kamala Harris, it's unfettered abortion for everybody at any point in time. And 82% of Christian Democrats are okay with that. 81% of Christian Republicans are not. These people go to the same church services. They go to they get the same lessons preached to them out of the Bible. It goes on. Harris Christians were 7 times more likely than Trump Christians to support abortions being legal at any point up until birth, partial birth abortion. They're okay with it. They're okay with it. Like almost 3 in 10. 3 in 10 Kamala Harris Christians are okay with abortions between 6 and 9 months, presumably up until the moment of birth. How does that happen? What are these sermons? Is it because they're fixated in the mainline denominations for, in my opinion, the overindulgence in the salvation message? The salvation message is obviously important. But the church is a community of people who are believers. And what are they getting preached to? It's not about abortion, I can tell you that. But here's another stunner, another tell, another clue that something bigger than religion is going on. Democrat Christians trust the government. Republican Christians do not. 58% of Democrat Christians say yes. 71% of Republican Christians say no. Now, this was a poll during the Biden administration, but these numbers don't really shift that much. So it's not going to change. All of a sudden, Republicans aren't starting to trust the federal government. And not only that, Christians overwhelmingly want Christian morals in the presidency, but there's a very extreme confusion about what constitute religious morals. Which candidate for president shows the most religious morals, Kamala Harris or Donald Trump? And Christians said Trump by 6 points, but Democrat Christians, 77% said Harris. Republican Christians, 75% said Trump. But then look at it by religion. That's what's wild. Evangelicals said Trump by almost 30 points, and Catholics said Trump by only 2. Protestants said Harris by 1. It's like a completely torn religion, because I think a lot of these people answering the poll would be like evangelical Protestant. Which one am I? Well, it's important because if they said Protestant, they are torn between whether Harris or Trump has more religious morals. But if they said evangelical, pretty good odds that they think Trump does. So, like, what is this? Different flavors of Christianity? It's like the same Bible. Again, are there different sermons being taught, different congregations that decide to tolerate different domains of acceptable sin? I mean, that's what's happening in the Methodist Church right now. Methodist congregations, because of the schism, are literally voting on whether they think LGBT stuff is sinful or not. What has happened to mainline denominations? And why are these inconsistencies in the messages of church leadership being tolerated? Now, obviously, they aren't being tolerated fully because thousands and thousands of churches have been abandoning mainline denominations. They've been painted as anti-LGBTQ. They've been called traditionalist or conservative. Is that conservative? They decided not to change the Bible to support their like sexual identity. I guess Christianity isn't as important as sexual identity to these people. I don't know. But then you have this. This is from a different poll. This is 10,000 people across 10 battleground states in September of 2024. And again, I have to use proxies. I have to use litmus tests. And for me, this is a stand-in for ideological purity. for how monolithic the belief set is of a certain religious group. And again, I'm trying not to make this political, but there is a very clear divide between the value set of a Trump voter and the value set of a Harris voter. And look at the religious results. Which of the two candidates, in your view, has a better character, Kamala Harris or Donald Trump? And so for Donald Trump, you have to be overlooking maybe the lies that you've been told that he's a rapist, or maybe his mean tweets. For Kamala Harris, like, I don't even know what her character is. I guess it's kind of weak. She is unwilling to make strong stances about the issues that Americans cared about. And, she's part of a heartless administration that flooded the border. She was the border czar, don't forget. But America said Harris by 4 points, whatever. And in this poll, I think it was Trump plus 1 or 2. So character didn't really matter that much. People probably like the fact that Donald Trump has a brash character. I don't know. But look at evangelicals. They say Trump by over 30 points. And Protestants, again, the same signal. Protestants say Harris by 1. Catholics say Trump by 5, and maybe they care more about abortion. I don't know. Maybe it's other things. Jewish voters said Harris by 30 points. Muslims said Harris by 16. But look at atheists. Atheists were very sure that Kamala Harris had a better character than Donald Trump. 77% to 19%. How does this make you feel if you're a Christian? Protestants are so close to the general population, it's almost like it doesn't affect their worldview at all. And this is why I think that there are schisms happening, why congregations are being torn asunder. Essentially, they're being told by their leadership that, again, the congregation votes on what your worldview is. Your worldview is in your hands. You can contort the teachings of Jesus Christ in order to make yourself feel comfortable with voting for somebody who many would say represents non-biblical values. And church has become, in my opinion, about tolerance and acceptance in many cases, and not about judgment and repentance and very clear delineations about what sin are and are not. Postmodernism, it's eating into every part of our society and undermining all of the institutions as a way to subvert our society. People who believe in no God, essentially nothing, are the most certain about how their worldview guides them to make political choices. And I just don't understand how that happens. People are supposed to be going to church to get the answers. And yet in this poll, the people who have the clearest answer are atheists. Now, how does this happen? I don't know. Maybe the information war, maybe peak lying, psychological manipulation. Our last decade must have had the most gaslighting that we've ever seen as the human race, likely contributing to all the societal wreckage we see, the mental health problems, the broken homes and families, the cognitive dissonance, and the fears about political violence, which are getting higher and higher. We've polled on this. Political violence concerns are now the #1 issue in America. But I think it's fair to ask how people are forming their opinions about their worldview. Well, I don't think that they're just following the Republican Party line anymore. I don't think they're listening to like William F. Buckley Jr. talk about conservative values, being a good conservative, listening to the Heritage Foundation. And obviously, they're not paying a ton of attention to what their church says. So it's got to be something else. Well, one of the things might be brand loyalty and commitment to certain ideological driven communities or echo chambers, because look at the vast gulf between the people who say they trust MSNBC most and the people who say they trust Newsmax most when it comes to their #1 issues. Which issue is the most important one for the next president to solve? Abortion rights, illegal immigration, rising prices, or protecting our democracy? Now, I picked these on purpose, these 4. They are generally the top 4, although violent crime was in there, I think. And there's, I guess, 2 that you would expect conservatives to pick, 2 that you would expect liberals to pick. But look at the MSNBC viewers. They really did. Their #1 issue was protecting our democracy, 46%. Their #2 issue, 28%, was abortion rights. So 74% of these people picked the right answer for liberals, basically. But if you look at Newsmax, 63% said illegal immigration, 23% said rising prices. That's 86%. And Fox News viewers were right there with them, with 81% saying illegal immigration or rising prices. And okay, fine. They watch different news. The news is fake and gay. It's propaganda. And so you'd expect them to have a different set of issues. But how far apart are they? Almost 80% on one side pick these two issues. Almost 80% on the other side pick these two issues. But here's the problem. In the 2024 election, protecting our democracy wasn't really a real issue. Donald Trump didn't subvert the 2020 election. In fact, probably quite the opposite happened. And Donald Trump sat there and got convicted of a whole bunch of crimes when the Department of Justice was weaponized against him. And he went through all of the steps, as a candidate running for presidency. In fact, the Democrats are the ones that did the most anti-democratic thing by anointing Kamala Harris without a primary process. So protecting our democracy was what MSNBC viewers were conditioned to care about first, followed by another almost 3 out of 10 who said abortion rights when there was already the Roe v. Wade decision that kicked it back to the states. Like, what did they think Donald Trump was going to do? Like, just trample over the Supreme Court and be a dictator and take away all abortions? I really think they probably believe that, but you have to admit that those two issues were kind of fake issues. Well, what were real issues? Illegal immigration was an issue. We had like 8 million more illegal immigrants. And I guess rising prices were really bad too. Those were real issues. Those were probably the correct answer. And so you have people, passionate watchers of MSNBC and CNN, being conditioned to care about like fake issues. These things have consequences. They affect the psyche of Americans, the social fabric. And I mean, it gets worse. There have been costs to all of this gaslighting. This is another Heartland Institute poll. This is what COVID mass formation did to Democrats. And if you look at these numbers here, find the unvaccinated, over 50% of Democrats wanted to find the unvaccinated. Almost 60% wanted to lock the unvaccinated at home. What's that, like 47% said they wanted to send unvaccinated to quarantine camps. And then almost 30% of Democrats wanted to take children from unvaccinated parents. Another almost 50% wanted to fine and imprison critics of the vaccine. And I can tell you the numbers for Joe Biden's strong approvers were like way worse, even worse. For almost every one of these, it was a majority. I think for everything except taking away the unvaccinated children. Like that's really, really, like that was, I guess, a bridge too far for the true believers, the Joe Biden strong approvers. But again, there are more costs to all the gaslighting, even worse than a majority of Democrats wanting to imprison people who question the efficacy of vaccines. Dems were split on whether arson was an acceptable form of protest against Tesla. 1/3 of Democrats thought Luigi Mangione's murder of the United Healthcare CEO was understandable because of the high price of healthcare. 28% of Democrats, according to RMG Research, wished that the Butler assassin hadn't missed Donald Trump. And then there's this question. Turning Point founder Charlie Kirk was recently assassinated while holding an event in Utah. Which is closer to your opinion, though? That Charlie Kirk was peacefully and respectfully debating people, and it's a tragedy that he was murdered, or that Charlie Kirk was speaking hateful words, and his murder was tragic but also understandable? Now, clearly, the first response there is the right answer. And 62% of America got the right answer, but 26% did not. It's not good to respond saying that somebody's murder is understandable. And Democrats were like split on this. 40% of Democrats said the wrong answer. That's really wild. Independents were like, no, this is not understandable. It's tragic. Only 27% independents. And independents were pretty split on Harris and Trump. So there's an aspect of morality there that the Democrats are failing more than everybody else. But it's always the bookends. Time and time, the same pattern by age. The boomers, overwhelmed by failing institutions that were with them their whole lives, force-feeding themselves on mainstream media hours and hours, and the Zoomers getting their information from somewhere, forming this monoculture liberal worldview. Where are they getting that information? Well, like probably the internet. Surely a few public school teachers, a few moms with Munchausen syndrome by proxy, maybe a few shows on Disney Plus or Netflix. It's not enough to indoctrinate youth into a complete atheistic, degenerate, and communistic worldview. I just don't think it is by itself. It has to be the internet. And in 2024, Zoomers spent 112 full days on their phones. Full days on their phones. There's a new online monoculture, thankfully no longer on Twitter, but it's indoctrinating these kids because they are craving indoctrination. Like I said, I think that there is a missing hole, a void that needs to be filled. They don't have role models. They don't have those like Boy Scout troop leaders that I had that were like former Nom people that told me to suck it up, Buttercup, when I whined about something. They don't have heroes. The heroes have even been taken away from them and filled with all of this modern slop. They are craving a hole to be filled, and they fill it with the internet, specifically communities they think are like-minded, and a lot of games too. So like just take these individually. You have Roblox, that's the lower right. Roblox is a huge online gaming community that has millions of games that users make. And yet, despite all of the choices, I had a lot of choices in games too, and a lot of people played a lot of different things when I was a kid, but now they all seem to play the same thing. They all play Fortnite, they all play Minecraft, and they all play Grow a Garden on Minecraft because despite all of the options, the millions of games available to these Zoomers, Grow a Garden reached the world time record of concurrent online gamers at any one time. I think it actually got up to 23 million. That's really astounding. For how many years Counter-Strike has been there, I don't think it's ever gotten close. 23 million. These Zoomers just like to go out and hang out on Roblox, and I've played it. It's really, really freaking weird. And they're also being groomed there. And Roblox is also ostensibly letting it happen, but they play Fortnite. They watch Mr. Beast. They do the floss. They crunch YouTube shorts and TikTok for hours and hours and hours, just drinking in whatever the algorithm gives them. Mindless stuff. None of it is truly reinforcing positive societal norms, let alone Christian worldview. It's just not. Like their odds of getting exposed to Christianity, of learning about the value of hard work, about being trained to become a producer, a provider, even to go out and touch grass and seek the companionment of somebody of a like-minded worldview of the opposite sex. It's just not happening. But after all of this, you have Reddit. That's the upper left. And I saved Reddit for the last. I think it's the biggest. It's the 5th biggest website in the US. I think it's the largest influence here by size. If you went and looked for Google search trend organic volume and compared TikTok and Facebook and Reddit, you'll find that Reddit has the largest search volume too. It's massive. It's got probably the largest community of everything on the internet because it's taken over essentially what bulletin boards used to do. It's got the largest political community, I'm pretty sure. The subreddit for politics alone is 9 million people, like 5 million people go there a week. And what you'll find on Reddit is that their anonymous moderator system brutally enforces a liberal worldview. If you act at all like a conservative, you'll get banned. In fact, they ban you from all these subreddits just for going and joining a conservative subreddit. They banned the largest Donald Trump community on the internet, just kicked it off for a fake reason. And these moderators have ungodly power. A very small, concentrated group of anonymous moderators controls the culture, essentially, can brutally enforce the correct narrative. And just go check out reddit.com/r/politics if you want to see. This is where people are learning that Charlie Kirk was a hateful bigot. This is where people are being socially reinforced that Donald Trump is a fascist. This is where all of the trans stuff is happening. The subreddit for transgenders is larger than the subreddit for Christianity. There's a subreddit called Ask Transgender that is literally grooming kids. There's like no age filter. You just say, oh, I'm 18. Yeah, sure. Nod and wink. But the teenagers will go on Reddit to try and learn more about Pokemon cards or about how to play Fortnite better. And they'll be exposed by people that are cross-pollinating ideas that are posting on other forums. They'll wind up on our trans. And what they'll see is a whole lot of support, a whole lot of people that are vested in validating them as an individual, as helping them be seen in a world that has literally cast them aside. They're looking for a hole to fill. And unfortunately, it would appear that those holes are filled by being hateful, by believing in this communistic worldview that says, no, you don't have to work hard. You don't have to better yourself and go work hard and provide for a family. The government should just give it to you by putting the point of a gun to somebody else's head. That is actually a very appealing message, and they are sucking it up. Another hole is being filled by the LGBTQ community. No, you don't need to attract another human equal to partner with by bettering yourselves and being a provider, being with somebody till death do you part. No, it's about whatever. Let's just feed into whatever kink you have and say, you know what? Words are violence. And if people won't reaffirm or validate the fact that you think you're a cat, then that's hateful. That your special little uniqueness needs to be forced down the throat of all. This is where they're being taught that. Think about the alleged shooter of Charlie Kirk, the people he surrounded himself with, the kind of activities he had, the places that he was likely being indoctrinated. Maybe he was an Antifa member. Maybe he was posting on the dark web. But I think he was just ushered into this hateful worldview by all of the internet on-ramps that are taking over the rearing of children in this country. And it's like, well, children are really sheltered right now. Parents will not let them out. And I don't know how to square that circle, because parents are certainly more protective. The ones that stick around, the ones that are still not in broken homes, there's helicopter parents. But the kids are getting phones a lot earlier. The kids are being exposed to social media that they're not able to cope with. The parents have no idea the kind of grooming that goes on. And I say grooming because they want their hooks in your kids. They want to propagate their worldview, almost like a religion. And think back to that polling that shows, yes, the atheists are most certain about their worldview. Okay, so the Zoomers are lost. Got a lot of work to do to clean that up. Not sure how to solve all their problems, but society needs to figure out how to do it. But where does that leave us politically? Well, I think we're in a political realignment. And I've talked to enough political scientists recently to know that they're having a hard time coming to grips with this also. This is, I think, probably what the status quo calls the most accurate representation of politics in America, the political spectrum. And it tries to put people on the economic right and the economic left. The economic right is like free market capitalism, no regulation, just go out and pull yourself up by your bootstraps. And the economic left is, okay, well, rob from the rich to feed the poor kind of thing, but it turns into like socialism, I guess. Authoritarian versus libertarian, like how much you want the state involved in enforcing these systems. And you can say, well, you have, MAGA. I don't even know where you put MAGA on here. I guess it's economic right, but I think a lot of people in MAGA are like, well, screw China and America first and kick the H-1Bs out. That's not really free market. I think they want people like Amazon broken up, and they hate the concentration of wealth and power and all the financial influences. Like, I really don't know. To me, this just doesn't feel like it works. Almost like our traditional political models have broken down. Because like I said, there is a Republican and Democrat battle, but it seems so irrelevant. And I went to the halls of the Capitol, and it just reeked of complacency. And, almost like a coordination between the two sides. I don't know. It didn't feel like any battles were being fought in Washington, D.C. It didn't. And ideologically, it doesn't feel like there are battles being fought either. It seems like the entire internet, except for Twitter, has just completely ceded the ideological battle to progressivism. And conservatism almost feels like a luxury belief, because only 22% of Americans say that today's children will be better off than their parents. People, in my opinion, don't want to hear about corporate tax cuts trickling down on them like urine, because the corporates will just use that tax savings to hire more H-1Bs. And again, economic right, this is a populist movement. I think that the right is only going to win with an economic populist movement. Well, is that economic right? I don't know. So I tried to define what I thought was the more appropriate political matrix that really captures, because what you want to do with these things is show that, well, most of these people are in one quadrant. That way I can form a political movement that addresses the desires and needs of most Americans. And so here's my stab of it. On the one axis, instead of economic freedom, you have grift tolerance. That's how willing you are to turn a blind eye to just blatant theft and fraud in the government. So on the left, it's like, nope, you don't want any toleration. You want these people in jail. On the right, it's like, oh, no, 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 it's fine. We need Social Security, and it's okay if 40% of it goes to duplicate payments to Venezuelan drug cartels. That's fine. And then vertically, you have authority trust. So on the bottom is like, nope, Anthony Fauci should be in jail, and I want everybody fired from the government. And on the top is like, no, 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 long live our elitist betters. They got it right during COVID. So the lower left, I think, is where 65% of America is. I've measured this many ways with the amount of trust in the federal government, with how much hatred people have for the level of waste, fraud, and abuse. The fact they think they're living in a police state by roughly 70% to 30%, over and over and over again. Remember when Doge was going wild, Donald Trump's approval rating was at its highest. And so these people have zero grift tolerance and they have no trust in authority. And I say that these people want to burn the system down. Obviously, I mean figuratively, but they don't like the way the government is working right now. And actually, I think a lot of 18 to 29-year-olds are in this window as well, because they were happiest as well with Donald Trump. He got a 60% approval rating with 18 to 39s in the middle of all this Doge stuff. They don't think the system works and they want it completely reconfigured. Now, the problem I have is that most Republican politicians and the Republican establishment, and I think a lot of Democrats, are in the upper right. They have complete trust in authority. They think they're doing fine. They don't think the government needs to be dismantled, maybe tweaked a little bit. And they certainly don't want anybody looking into any of the ill-gotten gains or alleged fraudulent activity. They don't want USAID shut down. They don't want anybody auditing Fort Knox. They don't want the Fed audited either. Those people have a high tolerance for grift. That's where your leaders are, especially on the right. So you see how this is a problem with the core MAGA and most Americans on the lower left, and core establishment Republicans and actually most elected representatives in the upper right. Now, the other matrices are a little less relevant here, but if you trust authority, but you have zero grift tolerance, then you think that experts can run the system better. We just haven't found the right experts. We have to get better scientists. If anybody messed something up during COVID, well, they tried their best, and we just need to get better ones. And clearly, Donald Trump is not hiring the right folks. So we need to win electorally so we can get our folks in there, because clearly Pete Buttigieg was the best Department of Transportation leader we've ever had. And then on the lower right, you have, well, they tolerate a lot of grift, but they don't trust authority. And that's people on the outside that wishes it was their system. This is where you have like communists like AOC. They just want to take over and use it for their own gains. I think this is where George Soros people are. I think this is, and obviously they've done a pretty good job, but like this is their intention and desire. They wish it was their system and they're going to take it over. So I think this kind of describes the left. In the upper left, you have probably the core Democrat voter. And in the lower right, you have probably the core insane radical leftist communist leader. So again, the sooner that elected representatives understand this, the better. I don't think it's Republican versus Democrat anymore. The Democrats will get their voters, but I don't think that Republicans have fully converted all of the people that voted for Donald Trump. And they're not going to do it by just saying vote Republican. It's not going to work. But I also don't think it's going to work by saying vote conservative. And I don't think it's going to work by saying vote Christian. I don't think it's going to work by saying vote for economic freedom, for capitalism, because people think the system failed. So look at my matrix and understand that gutturally. People are mad. People are piling into the burn the system down quadrant. And people are increasingly getting desperate, afraid, and angry. Biden administration forced people into the arms of the Make America Great Again, America First movement because they can't afford to put food on their table. The police were defunded. Their cities were burned down. Their businesses were closed. Their relationships destroyed. People were allegedly harmed by emergency medication forced down the throats of Americans. They were backed into a corner. People are increasingly desperate, afraid, and angry. 90% are now concerned about political violence. That's the number one issue in America because of the Charlie Kirk assassination. 43% of America thinks that a civil war or revolution is likely in the next few years. And that's one of the reasons that 18 to 29-year-olds are actually seeking God. 56% of 18 to 29-year-olds think that there's a civil war or revolution likely in the next few years of 18 to 29-year-old Christians. 51% thought that there would be a violent reaction to the election if Kamala Harris had won. 47% thought a violent reaction if Trump had won. And then there is Irina Zarutska, a stunning case, a beautiful young woman, her life taken from her by a repeat offender, a career criminal that the Democrat establishment just kept putting out on the street heartlessly. And this woke people up. Think about how closely held your beliefs are when you respond to somebody about whether you support the death penalty or not. It really tells people a lot about you, your values, where you prioritize justice, maybe some aspect of religion. It's something that you have to think long and hard about, and it tells people about you. Well, the last time we measured it, capital punishment was supported by a plurality of Americans by 13 points, 49 to 36. Well, after Irina Zarutska, capital punishment for DeCarlos Brown is plus 40. It was 60% to 20%. Only 1 in 5 Americans did not want this guy executed. It was plus 70 with Republicans, plus 20 with Democrats. Americans want justice. And that's one of the problems because they're not getting it fast enough. I think that this is one of the reasons Donald Trump won. 67%, including a huge chunk of Democrats, want the swamp drained. Democrats believe in fairness. They believe in justice too. They're just lied to more than you are. And the lies are more successful for a whole host of reasons. But what's the church's answer to this? Does the church even have a role here? Is it okay to have justice, or does everything have to be accepted and tolerated? Is it okay to execute murderers? Because I'm pretty sure that we would find, because of the political makeup, that a majority of evangelical Christians, at least, who have the strongest worldview, the strongest Christian worldview, would think that it's okay to execute this guy. Is that non-Christian-like, according to non-Christians? What about the mainline denominations? Where do they stand on this guy? Well, I can tell you that I think a lot of mainline denominations, because I asked Twitter, didn't even mention Charlie Kirk. And so that's a complete head scratcher to me, because that's the biggest political killing in decades. And he was very much one of the biggest evangelists in the country. And so if your church doesn't have an answer for things like the Charlie Kirk assassination, maybe that's why, for instance, Protestants are super torn about their worldview. They literally, it's like they don't even go to church. When they have the same worldview as basically everybody else, like, what does it even mean? So where do we go from here? Well, the good news is I think we'll know soon. We are stuck in a rut, a very sine waved shaped rut that traces this arc over the annals of Western history, undulating between periods of high order and low order. And of course, I'm talking about the concept called the fourth turning, this historical framework that tries to account for the cyclical nature of Western history, basically caused by the fact that different generations come of age in different societal contexts. And history tells us that this pattern traces roughly between 80 and 100 years each cycle. But what happens is there's a major crisis. And because of that crisis, the society needs to come together and form strong institutions and be cohesive and like each other. And that usually gives us a golden age, a period of great plenty, like we had from 45 to, I don't know, roughly 65. And then because times are good, people get more individualistic. It's more about them. They explore new things. They branch out. Our period from roughly 65 to 85, that saw a lot of like hippies and protests and rock music and just, a lot of some decay. But then 85 to 2005, it felt good, but behind the scenes, things were definitely starting to crumble. It was not all on the up and up. A lot of the economic wreckage we suffer now, I think the foundations were being laid for that. But what happens is the order that society had is no longer needed. And so people cast aside the order. And then finally, the order disappears. That's what happens in the unraveling. That was 85 to 2005. And then you get to the crisis. And our crisis period probably began with the great financial collapse. And according to people who follow this, our crisis will end. The fourth turning is the crisis phase, will end sometime between 2025 and 2030. So we are due. And why does that happen? Well, the institutional rot gets so bad that people can't tolerate it anymore. And because of either the crumbling or because of a crisis, people reform their society. Public opinion changes really fast, which is why I'm interested in it. And they arrive at a new set of values given to us by a new set of leaders that build new institutions that restore our society to something that looks more like what we had in 45 to 65, but might be completely different. And it's usually done by a new generation. History tells us it'll be mostly millennials, might see some Xers, might see some Zoomers, because they're the hero generation, the same generation as the GI generation that fought World War II and gave us our period of being a superpower. This is literally the formal hypothetical manifestation of the idea that strong men create good times create weak men create hard times, and obviously hard times create strong men. But I'll spare you the rest of the details. But we are absolutely 100% due for a struggle that reorders society and hardens us like a crucible into a new set of societal values. I think we can all fundamentally feel that. Like, not a top-down push, like a bottom-up pull, a demand for order, a demand for a return to sanity. And I've been saying that I think what you're seeing on X is a harbinger of what's to come. And some of that will probably feel like intolerance. Like, people can no longer accept this, the perversion that breaks us all apart, of lies and of degeneracy and of wanton self-interest and corruption. Decaying trust, broken families, strangling expenses, concentration of power, subversion of institutions, confused churches, leading to meaningless lives. History tells us we'll see a golden age soon, but the question is, after what? At what cost? So those are my thoughts, kind of bleak, and I don't really have answers. Not really sure what my call to action is. There's a fight for the soul of America happening right now, though, and it's not Republican versus Democrat. It's one that will determine what the future for our children and grandchildren looks like. I think we all know that. I've been saying this. I do not want my kids drafted into war for NATO expansionism in Eastern Europe. I don't want them to die in a Ukrainian mudfield. And it seems like all of the powers to be are craving for war. We hear about military buildup in China. We hear about U.S. ships circling Venezuela. We hear about what's going on with Israel in the Middle East. And we hear about predicates for war with Russia, about Article 5 response to Russian planes flying over NATO allies, about NATO thirsting for Ukraine to become a member, even though it borders Russia. A nuclear power, by the way, who has ties to China, who may or may not be involved in subverting our elections through Venezuelan voting machine companies. Like, we're in a dark place. But the solution isn't a 50-year thing. It isn't even a 10-year thing, probably. It's happening right now. And so the fixes that we have that we need to consider and the actions that need to be taken aren't things like, well, like Turning Point USA, for instance. It's great that it exists. It's reaching people. It's going to reach more people. It's going to reach a lot of Gen Z folks. It's probably a really great thing that we should fund and continue. And I'm really happy that they have new leadership and that they found new life under Erica Kirk. But everybody says that that's the answer, and it's not the answer. It's not working. I'm telling you right now, Turning Point USA is not enough. And what you'll probably hear from Republican politicians is, oh, it's so great. That's our solution for the future. No, Republicans, you do not have a solution. I've heard them talk, and so far I have not heard of any viable political solutions that the right has. Donald Trump is obviously doing a lot of it. It's like, okay, we're not going to put up with crime anymore. We are going to roll the National Guard down Broadway in your city. And I think America is applauding for that. The polling is very good. But the accountability signal, people still don't have trust in their government, as we've seen recently with the FBI. We have not seen the level of accountability that people expected to see. People want arrests. People want audits. People want election integrity. People want folks who manipulated intelligence for the Russian collusion hoax to go to jail. Yes, people thought that Joe Biden was profiting from his relationships in China. And they assume, 70% of them assume that it's likely that most politicians are personally profiting in illegal ways from their positions of power. So we can't be ruled like this. It's even questionable about whether we have a representative democracy if the allegations about elections are what they are. So I don't know if we're aware of all of the forces that are causing this conflict, but I think it's fair to say, maybe a little glimmer of hope, that we know a lot more than we did 5 years ago. We know a lot more than we did even just a year ago. I think none of us would have been able to predict the kind of stuff that we would have seen just, for instance, out of USAID. But are we seeing all of the forces, and are any of them being actively countered? I think most representatives don't even know what Reddit is, let alone the fact that it's probably, in my opinion, the number one driver of a lot of the degeneracy we see. But it's not about party. I don't think it's about capitalism or socialism anymore. Do you think that just being told that capitalism is better is going to help an 18 to 29-year-old person who's trying to start a family, maybe, hopefully, who thinks that they'll never be able to afford a house? They don't want to hear about your capitalism. I don't even think it's about ideology, conservatism. What is that? What is conservatism? People don't want to hear Larry Kudlow talking about Art Laffer. They don't want to hear that. It's about a struggle between two vastly different worldviews, one which is ubiquitously not held by the people that rule every aspect of your life. That's the problem. All these institutions are taken over by this neo-Marxist, neo-modern, whatever it is, liberal monoculture. That's why they're pushing all this slop out. That's why like every brand has been affected by the message. And they're increasingly influencing our future generations. It's not a matter of if. It's happened. They have affected, there's been a toll. They have affected the youngest generation. Should we be ruled by a system that will undermine our future, steal our tax money, and even steal the hope of our children, and then laugh in our faces, rubbing our noses in absurd lies and stealing our very value system? Stealing our value system. That is what has happened. And if no, what should the role of the Republican Party be? What should the role of MAGA be? Is the Republican Party going to be the party of MAGA? And if not, is MAGA enough? Remember, MAGA was about like holding China accountable, building a wall. Yes, reordering the economic system to favor middle-class Americans, but is it happening fast enough? Is it going to get fixed? Because if it doesn't get fixed and fixed soon, the left is going to fix it. That's why you see Zoran Madmani. That's why you see all of these people in the 18 to 29-year-olds being super socialist, even the ones who voted for Trump. If this doesn't get fixed soon and aggressively, and the Republican Party reform into something that has an answer for these people are going to fix it themselves, and you're not going to like how they do it. And to all of the other organizations that represent values institutions in America, think tanks, the church, foundations, nonprofits, what's your role in this? Are you just going to watch it happen? People will return to the church. It happens. History tells us these things come in waves. But the last time there was a major revival was the Civil War. And so if you saw that coming, if you knew that things were getting that bad, is there a role for the church? And what should that role be? Because it would appear that even though a lot of Americans still identify as Christian, the Christian worldview is objectively, in some measures, losing here. Will there be a revival? Are you going to count on it to happen by itself? And is your current message enough to drive that revival? I don't know, but I currently have not really heard very viable answers by really anybody, and I'm trying. I'm trying to understand this. So maybe it's just new. Maybe people have been sleeping on this, and my polling about 18 to 39s being super socialist is really just the first evidence that people are going to have to come to terms with. I don't know. But if this is what does it, it's kind of sad that Rasmussen Reports is the first people that had to sort of knock this domino over. Because most of the people I hear are patting themselves on the back about how great it is that Generation Z is the most conservative generation in decades. Those are the people that are pretty much running this movement. Those are the people who you have to put your political trust in. And it's just not good enough. And so this is my message to them. Again, I'm just trying to take a really messy situation and put some order behind it. And there are no good answers. But this is coming to a head very soon, if history is any guide. Remember the complete reversal that happened in 2001. Everybody was at each other's throats about the Bush versus Gore case that decided that election over a couple hundred hanging chads. And then fast forward less than 12 months later, and George W. Bush has an 85% presidential approval rating. How did that happen? How did America become so unified? How did America triple its military enlistment in 1 year? Well, obviously, it was because of a major crisis. And America will come together and form different institutions. I kind of wonder what would happen if 2001 were today and what the modern left would do. I think the situation might be different. And so that tells me that I don't think that we've seen the end of the fourth turning. I really don't, because our institutions are way worse than they were in 2001. I can tell you that. It's been going, I mean, just look, by my measure, wealth inequality is 5 times worse than it was when those 2 planes hit the Twin Towers. So we're rapidly accelerating into this endgame scenario. And we have Marxist accelerationists trying to push us there. J.B. Pritzker posturing against National Guard troops that he refuses to call up to defend our own federal law enforcement agents in Chicago. All of this resistance by Gavin Newsom and the threat to redistrict all Republican support out of California. It's escalating rapidly, and nobody's going to de-escalate it. So, to anybody watching this in a position of power, what's your role? Reframe it about worldview. How is a positive free market capitalist rooted in Western values, focused on logos and objective truth, how is that worldview going to compete with another worldview that appears to be winning and is very attractive to a generation that increasingly looks lost? You have to have an answer for this, and you have to get one ASAP. So that was a lot. I thought a lot about this. And again, it's not still fully formed. I'm not an orator. I'm a numbers guy. But I don't think that everybody is talking about this in its entirety. I think they're trying to look for hopium. They're trying to pin their hopes on some institution that increasingly looks like it's not there to save them. Republican Party is not going to save you. Big conservatives not going to save you. The talking heads that you follow aren't going to save you. Apparently, the church has abdicated its responsibility here, increasingly. So I would love to hear your thoughts. Post them in the comments. Please like the video, subscribe. Nobody's going to fund this kind of truthiness. They don't want to hear these things. It makes it uncomfortable. They just want to think that they're going to keep winning. And if they lose, they'll find a way to profit from losing. And I don't want to be pessimistic, but with the way the Democrat Party is acting right now, I'm pretty afraid for what it's going to look like when the pendulum swings back. So like this video. If you agree, follow me on Twitter, please, @HonestPollster. Subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. We have another channel, Rasmussen_Rewind, where you can see clips from our live streams. We're going to live stream tomorrow, Tuesday, 9 p.m. Eastern. Be there. If you've learned something, make sure to like the video and subscribe. Follow us on X at Rasmussen_Poll and myself @HonestPollster. You can watch our videos on YouTube at Rasmussen_Poll and Rasmussen_Rewind, and on Rumble at Rasmussen Reports. We stream multiple times a week on Twitter, Facebook, Rumble, YouTube, and Getter. Thanks for watching.